Alrighty, so welcome to today's webinar on mobile app analytics with Google Analytics. Today's webinar is being presented to the US or North American market, or anybody really that's checking in from other parts of the world. We presented this earlier today for the group in the MENA region. So a couple housekeeping items before we jump into the webinar. There's a chat panel, there's a questions panel. Feel free to put your comments and questions there. Feel free to sign up for our future events as well. I put a link in the chat panel to our events page. Ask questions throughout. Should have some time at the end of the webinar to also field some questions. Timing for this is probably going to be between 45 minutes and 50 minutes. So we'll have maybe 5 or 10 minutes at the end of the webinar to cover any questions that might come on. And I'll also stay a few extra minutes as well. This webinar is recording, as I mentioned before. It'll be available online. Our marketing team will get that up and emailed out to you as well. So I think without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started. I'm going to be sharing my Google presentation in this view here because when I go full screen, sometimes there's also connectivity issues. But today's topic is mobile app analytics with Google Analytics. First and foremost, a little bit background about myself and the company. My name is Amin Shaki. I'm the Regional Managing Director at Infotrust for the MENA region, Middle East, Northern Africa. I'm actually dialing in today from Dubai, UAE. But that's totally fine because I love talking to my US counterparts. The company I work for, Infotrust, we're Google Analytics certified partners, premium authorized resellers, AdWords partners, as well as we work extensively with Google Tag Manager, Salesforce, and other tools. We do these types of training events and webinars and educational seminars, if you will, many times throughout the year. We do more than 30 programs, speak at different conferences, different events. We have many more webinars coming up, so I'll be mentioning that quite a bit, lots of shameless plugs. But we also work extensively with clients. I mean, we're a web analytics consulting company. We specialize with Google Analytics and we're Google partners, but some of our clients are large global CPGs with hundreds of brands, hundreds of regional websites. And our offices are both in Cincinnati and Dubai. And that's a little bit of background about us. Just so you guys know that, or feel comfortable that we know what we're talking about, some of the examples of our clients and projects include Fortune 50 CPG or FMCG companies where we built their global web analytics measurement strategy, implementation plan, architecture across hundreds of sites and mobile apps, which is what we're going to be focusing on today's topic. We work extensively with e-commerce and retail companies on their tag management system, deployment, technical tracking setup, as well as media conglomerates. We primarily focus on those verticals, but we've worked with a number of other clients as well. Some of our capabilities, as a company, we have services as well as digital products. Our service side is more on web analytics strategy or technical implementation, as I mentioned before, reporting, analysis, optimization, and then ongoing support. A lot of today's webinar is going to be showing the different capabilities with Google Analytics for apps specifically. So if you have a mobile application right now and you have Google Analytics tracking, a lot of this might be a review, but hopefully some new insights on why to use certain reports or how to segment them or take it a little bit deeper. If you don't have a mobile app yet or you haven't implemented Google Analytics, you're just exploring its capabilities, this will give you a wide range of all the opportunities that you have with Google Analytics for your mobile apps. I'm also going to be mentioning a little bit about our products. So we've built digital products that help support our web analytics consulting arm and Google Analytics services. So it looks like someone might have lost sound. Let me know if anyone else has lost sound. Otherwise, here, I'll just post on the chat pane. If lost sound, please try reconnecting. But we'll continue on since that might not be a wide-scale issue. But one of the products that we will be mentioning today that I actually mentioned or described it thoroughly in a previous webinar, I think 2 weeks ago, is Analyzely. It's our data integration product. Because quite frankly, majority of what I'm going to be showing you today is revolved around the mobile analytics capabilities of GA. But a lot of things are the same, whether you're looking at a web Google Analytics setup or a mobile app Google Analytics setup, because the product and the principles with data collection and data reporting are the same. So I'm going to explain to you a little bit how GA works, and then how GA works specifically for apps with a lot of example reports and how those are constructed. So as far as the agenda for today, we're going to talk about some key features, capabilities with GA, how you can start measuring your mobile apps, what you need to know, a little bit of the technical side, or really just some requirements, almost like a checklist of things to keep in mind, whether you have an app on the Google Play or Android side or on iOS. We're going to debunk the misconception that Google Analytics or Google doesn't work with Apple, and actually show how Google Analytics can track iOS engagement, iOS campaigns, install tracking, etc. But then we're going to, throughout talk about some common challenges, best practices, and really how to get started. At the very end of this presentation or this webinar, we're going to talk a little bit about Google Tag Manager and how that's a really powerful asset when you're working with mobile apps, particularly with tracking and analytics deployment. Okay, so let's get started with how GA collects data. Now, this is a basic overview of how Google Analytics actually works. This visual I've used many times before in multiple trainings and webinars, but it paints the picture of how Google Analytics actually collects data. So as users are visiting your website or mobile application, as long as you have the Google Analytics code implemented, whether it's on the website, so the JavaScript starts to fire, or it's in app where either the Google Tag Manager SDK or Google Analytics SDK is implemented, some information will start to be collected. Information around the user's device, or if they're on the web, some cookie information, browser data, whether they're new or returning, all sorts of data attributes are collected on the fly, packaged up into a hit or a request that's sent out to Google servers, and that's where the data is processed, aggregated, and actually output into the reports that you see when you log into Google Analytics. Now, the key here is that Google Analytics, up until about 2 or 3 years ago, maybe closer to 3 years ago, Google had, or the way it was set up was tracking web and apps separately. There was no way to aggregate the views or get a holistic number unless you did that offline. Now, with Google Analytics, you can actually track mobile apps and website traffic together, which might make sense if your mobile app is just a mirror of your website. If you're an e-commerce player and you sell both on your website and mobile apps in very similar fashion, or if you're trying to get roll-up reporting metrics on total users, total conversions, total transactions, total sessions, those top-level metrics, we always recommend collecting data of your website and mobile apps together. That also unlocks some interesting reports, which we'll go through, like cross-device reporting. So it is certainly possible to collect the data together and then also segment and filter it separated so that you can see mobile apps versus desktop or Android versus iOS versus web, etc. Now, the basic principle with Google Analytics is the same, whether you're tracking apps or web, even if you're tracking them together, as far as how the data is constructed, how the reports are built, and actually presented as you log in. And the concept here is that Google Analytics will display dimensions and metrics, where dimensions are specific data attributes or the data points that you're collecting around your users and sessions and the information itself. So some examples are shown here, such as the city or the source of traffic that's driving a user to your website or to install your application, the browser type, operating system, type of user, the actual data attribute. Metrics are simply the way to measure those dimensions. So the count of sessions, the count of screen views or page views, time on site, things like that. These two together, these two bits of information combined together in Google Analytics unlocks the insights. So you'll notice a lot of the reports that I show will be in this tabular or table form, where it has dimensions and then metrics to provide some context around that particular dimension. So the reason I bring this up is because when you come down to the basics, Google Analytics for mobile app or mobile app analytics using GA, it's not that much different from web. Technically, implementation-wise, it is for sure, but the output, the reporting, the design of Google Analytics is quite the same. So whether you create a mobile app view in Google Analytics or a web view, there's going to be some differences in reports and what you can query, but the general structure and the way Google architects its program, its software, is the exact same. Speaking of mobile app analytics and mobile app views, here is just a screenshot to show you what a mobile app specific view looks like, and some of the additional reports that are only available for mobile apps, including some reports around Google Play, iTunes, install campaign tracking around what's driving installs of your application, and then a few other reports and specific metrics designed around your app. But the key here again is that the general buckets or construct of Google Analytics is really the same, not depending on what platform you're on. Any platform that you have Google Analytics set up for, you'll have acquisition data, user data, or audience data, if you will, engagement or behavioral data, and then conversions as well. So the general construct of Google Analytics is relatively the same. The app analytics views just give you a little bit more about Google Play or specific engagement that users can do within an app that you can't do on a website. So to show you the first example of an app-specific report, it's just the app overview. Essentially, this is a dashboard that Google pre-builds with any app view. And this shows just the same or similar metrics like new users or country and top devices, but also can show active users, which is an app-specific metric, and a little bit more visuals about what's going on with your mobile app. Whether you're tracking specifically iOS or an Android separate, or you have a view that's aggregating all of your app traffic together, this is the app overview report that you can see. App data automatically can power a lot of these different reports here. The reason I bolded here sources is because we're going to spend a lot of time to talk about how Google Analytics tracks mobile app sources, meaning what actual channels or advertising methods or marketing methods are bringing people to load your app, to install your app, to actually engage with your app. So a common misconception, and really this might be from the branding side of things or lack of education around the capabilities with Google Analytics for apps, is that you can't track iOS installs with Google Analytics. While it's true there are definitely competitors in the industry that have more robust tracking for iOS or more partners and vendors that they can show, Google Analytics does have capability to show you what channels are driving installs of your iOS application, and after the application is actually loaded and users are navigating through, what they're actually doing. So it can tie those original sources and that attribution back to actual conversions or engagement in your app. iOS, and of course with Google Play, it's all owned by Google, so that is also possible. So we're going to talk a lot about sources with the different platforms. And you can see here in this slide a screenshot of where in your property settings, this is where you can begin to configure the different tracking. So with Google Play, it's all owned by Google, so you can link it within Google Analytics as well as within the Google Play Store, share data between the two, very similarly how you would connect Google AdWords or other Google products like Search Console with Google Analytics. The Google Play integration is free. You can use it with Google Analytics Standard. It's no additional cost. It's not a premium-only feature. In fact, I don't think I show anything here today in this webinar that's a premium or, according to the release today, an Analytics 360 specific deployment. It's all standard Google Analytics and available to anyone that has GA and Google Play together, as well as for iOS. So there is a setting under your property admin console where you can enable iOS campaign tracking. Now, this isn't all you have to do. There's definitely other steps that we'll get to here in a second, but this is the first step to begin that data flow, or at least notify Google Analytics that this type of information will start to be tracked. So make sure the reports are ready to be populated or to be surfaced. So a little bit of review, again, because Google Analytics is designed around the user, not around the platform or the sessions, the way sources are tracked for web apps or really any other platform is the exact same. You have the general parameters like source, medium, campaign, content, term. They all power the channel parameters or default channel groupings that you can customize. And we spent a great deal of time on our last webinar talking all about how to manage your advertising spend and allocate your budget and make sure you have great data to analyze what advertising channels you should be investing in, all on our last webinar. That should be on our website and available to view the recording or see the slides. So I'm not going to spend too much time here. I just want to point out that the process for apps when it comes down to the lowest level, is the same. You will have some sources, some medium, some parameters tracked that will power the channel groupings. The process is even quite similar. It's designed to be not seamless, but just very familiar. So with the web, this is an example of how you would track. You would put your website or your landing page and a series of UTM parameters with values for how you want the data to show up in Google Analytics for sources, medium, terms, etc. With mobile apps, you use the same process. You just have a few extra steps and a few extra parameters that are required to enable the data connection between the install or the Play Store or App Store page view, if you will, in the actual stores themselves to the actual load of your app that the user might conduct. So the extra steps that are required, and again, we'll go into a little bit more detail and show some screenshots of this, but you want to keep in mind and you want to have your process for campaign tracking, your standard nomenclature, whatever you've set up for web, apply to mobile apps as well for consistency purposes, particularly if you're looking at mobile traffic and web traffic together. For example, if you're advertising on Facebook, both on mobile and on web, you want to track that all together so you can see from a global perspective, how is that channel performing across all of your platforms. The additional steps that you would want to take, for example, for Google Play, is linking them. So linking the two platforms together will unlock the automatic integration. You still wanted to use campaign tracking because when users land on your Google Play store to actually review your app before they click install or click download, you can still be able to track where people are coming from to get to that page. With iOS, it's a little different. Apple will not allow tracking on that particular page where people click to install, but what you can enable is the fact that people are clicking on your advertising or different marketing campaigns to get to that page. And then if the user actually ends up installing and loading your app, you can tie back the fact that they opened and loaded your app to that initial advertising click. And the key concept here is to ensure IDFA, or the ID for advertisers, is enabled in your mobile application. So there's some technical specs on how to do this, or your app development team will need to adhere to. There's some special libraries and processes, but it's nothing out of the ordinary to surface this IDFA for iOS users and make sure it's available in your app to be passed with Google Analytics or into Google Tag Manager to ultimately be passed to Google Analytics with every single hit. That's our recommendation, is when you set the IDFA, where your developers are surfacing that, it's for anyone using an Apple device, and make sure it's on every single hit sent to Google Analytics. And this will unlock the connection with source medium values for iOS. But let's actually walk through how this works. So there's two methods or two processes that you can track iOS campaign installs. And really these screenshots are taken from the Google support pages, but I wanted to walk through and explain how this concept actually works. So you're advertising on different ad networks across the mobile app ecosystem, and you have links back to the App Store, the iTunes App Store, for users to actually download your app. As long as you're tagging those particular links to the iTunes App Store with UTM parameters, as well as with the IDFA, or as long as that ad network can provide that IDFA on click. The first method with redirect is when someone clicks on that ad network, they actually get redirected to a Google in-between page, if you will, or a server. It's a Google Analytics domain that will collect from the ad network click the UTM parameters that you set, as well as the IDFA that was provided from this particular ad network. It'll collect that information and store those parameters with the click that happened initially. After that, Google Analytics will redirect back to iTunes to allow the user to continue the install. Users will never see this. This is instantaneous. This redirect, users don't see, oh, I'm going to Google Analytics, that's weird, and then back to iTunes. As soon as a click happens, it's instantly, according to the user's eyes, they go to iTunes. But the process is in between. The ad network sent the user's click on that link with all the details within it to the Google servers. It collected information and redirected back to iTunes. As soon as the user installs the app and loads it, the app, assuming IDFA is tracking, it'll pass the IDFA of that user as they load the app back to GA. And since the IDFA was also collected up here after the click initially happened, there's the link that Google Analytics can make to say, aha, this click on this particular ad network that matches this IDFA was the same IDFA for this particular user that loaded this app later on. So we can attribute the fact that the app was installed and loaded back to that original click that happened. If a user clicks on an ad network, the data is sent to Google Analytics servers that the click happened, there's these UTM parameters, IDFA is collected, but then the user doesn't install the app, they hit iTunes and just stop there. There's no data that's going to be available in Google Analytics because the click can only be surfaced tied to this ad network if the app is actually loaded with IDFA tracked. So there's a couple components here that could be missing and causing your reports not to be populated. If the click on the ad network does not contain IDFA, even with a redirect to Google Analytics, Google won't know how to identify that particular user or that particular click, so it'll be an unknown click and it'll never tie back to your app, even if the app is tracking IDFA. Or vice versa, if the ad network is fully tracked with UTM parameters, IDFA is being added to the query string, Google Analytics redirect picks up those values, grabs the IDFA, and it's waiting to see when a user actually loads the app to tie the IDFA together. If your app does not have IDFA tracking, it'll be almost an anonymous or invisible user as they go through Google Analytics, and this attribution will never be able to be tied. So you need IDFA connected on both sides, in-app as well as with your ad network. So that's the redirect method. The second method is called a ping method, and this is the same concept. It's essentially getting the UTM parameters and the IDFA value to the Google Analytics server so that later on when the user loads the app, it can be stitched together. The difference here is that with some ad networks that partnered up with Google, on the click of the ad, the user will actually go directly to iTunes, but the ad network itself could say, oh, okay, this click happened. Let's send a note to Google directly with the parameters and the IDFA saying, hey, a click happened, and here are the values for the parameters or the IDFA itself. So Google's not in between here as a redirect. It's more just getting notified directly from the ad network of that activity. As soon as the user loads the app, the IDFA is tracked with their hits here within the app. It's tied back to the source or the click. So this is how install campaign tracking is feasible or possible with iOS. Now, as far as setting up the UTM parameters, they're not exactly the same as web. So there is a special page on the Google Developers Guide that shows you app-specific campaign parameters and which parameters are required. You'll notice there's a few other things that Google will need, like the property ID, the type, the specific ad network, and how to grab the actual IDFA. You'll notice here that Google's partnered up with a lot of different vendors, and this list is constantly growing. And the reason they partnered up with these vendors is to be able to surface that IDFA on the ad network click more easily. So AdMob or InMobi, some of these more popular mobile app ad networks, as soon as a click happens on one of those, then the IDFA will be surfaced, whether it's through the redirect or ping, and then as the user actually installs and loads it, it'll be stitched together. Now, the key concept here to also note is that there is a custom way to set up campaign tracking parameters for any ad networks that might not be shown here, but can still provide the IDFA with an ad network click by any user. It is true there are some platforms that this is just not possible, such as via email, because no email service provider, if you're sending emails to your users to download your app and they click on that email, if your email service provider can surface the IDFA, which most cannot, then you can set up the tracking. But since the click from the email straight to the iOS App Store doesn't contain IDFA, whether it's a Google Analytics redirect or a ping, it won't be able to get that attribution set up. But there are many ad networks that can have this setup accomplished. So there's a question that came in: are these two methods exclusive? No. To answer that question, it depends on your ad network. So if some ad networks do the ping, or you can do the ping method and you want to go that route, you can do it just for those ad networks, and then other ad networks you can do a redirect method. You actually set that in this install campaign tracking URL builder, whether it's a ping method or a redirect method, because again, the process for this is slightly different as far as what the tracked URL or tracked campaign parameters will be. So to check that out, I mean, you can go to the Google developers page and look at the UTM tracking for iOS to see specifically how that works. For Google Play, it's a little bit more simple. You use the UTM tracking parameters, but you also just link your Google Play and Google Analytics account, and the data will start feeding into your reports around what sources and mediums and channels, etc., are bringing users to your site. If it's an e-commerce site, or you can have transaction tracking, you can also include that with your deployment and see it tied back to the actual source that's driving the install. So just to show you, again, very similar setup for the UTM campaign tracking. There's a lot of automatic partners that will almost pre-populate some of these parameters that are needed, but then there's also an opportunity to use custom channels or custom ad networks as long as they can provide the ID as well. And then Google Play will be able to read that. Now, the extra added benefit with Google Play and Android being owned by Google and Google Analytics being owned by Google is that the Google Play Store views that it's themselves can also be tracked in your Google Analytics account. So even though it's not your website, technically, it's not your app, it's just the Google Play page that users can download your app from, you can pass that data into GA. And one cool report that's available is the Google Play Referral Flow reports. So as you're pushing or your marketing or advertising is pushing users to your Play Store page to actually install your app, the amount of times people see the Play Store versus actually install your app and then actually load your app, because there could be a lot of users that install but never open up your app. I mean, that happens quite frequently. You install an app and users forget that they did that, or they were doing it in a rush or what have you, and they never actually load the app within that time frame. This flow report shows you where the most significant drops are and how you can potentially optimize. So if you have a lot of installs, not a lot of opens or actual loads of the app, there might need to be a little bit more incentive for users to actually start using your app. Or if people are dropping off at your Play Store, maybe you're doing a good job of getting them there, but that's not really descriptive enough, or again, there's no incentive to actually install or drive that installation of your application. So this report's useful from a Google Play perspective, since Google can share this data across. So we're going to start getting into some of the report examples and nitty-gritty of the app views. One key thing to note here is that referrals in the sense of mobile apps will always get bucketed under direct traffic if they're organic referrals. That's why we highly recommend always using UTM tagging parameters, so that if you control the URLs that are going out on the internet on different ad networks or via different channels, using UTM parameters is a good way to try and ensure that you can see the visibility of what's driving installs. Otherwise, if other apps or other sources are encouraging users to download or install your application, but you don't know about it, or you were untagged, you left them untagged, those links back, it'll all show up as direct traffic, which basically means, in Google's terms, that someone went to your app store, whether it's Google Play or the Apple App Store page, installed your app without any marketing help at all, or they saw a commercial on TV and they decided to download your app directly. So it's not quite the best way to look at attribution or which marketing channels are actually working. Another cool report in Google Analytics is the marketplace app marketplace report. It's useful to see if you have your app on multiple marketplaces and you're tracking them all together in one single view, which marketplace might be performing better. You can set up a secondary dimension to see what devices are actually within those app marketplaces and see how those are performing as far as number of sessions or revenue or engagement. This report is powered by the App Installer ID. Unfortunately, the Apple App Store doesn't provide this. So you know this because if you set up the mobile device info for iPhone or iPad, for example, you'll see it's not set. But this is definitely a report that you can see how different app marketplaces might be performing, particularly if your app goes beyond just the Android Google Play Store or the App Store on iOS. One report that I want to show that's a little bit of a reminder of our webinar last week, and I'm sure for those of you that I've spoken to before, I talk about this capability all the time. It's cost data and return on advertising spend. Essentially with Google Analytics, you'll be able to see whether it's on web or app, the number of sessions and the volume of traffic coming from different channels, assuming you have the UTM campaign parameters set up. What you won't see automatically is the impressions, clicks, or cost of these different advertising networks or marketing channels that you might be investing with. Even with the iOS tracking with redirects or pings, seeing those clicks, it's still not going to get passed automatically into Google Analytics. This is where you can leverage the cost data import or just the data import capabilities with Google Analytics to bring in this additional data. So the concept here is that this isn't isolated again to just web. You can see cost and return on advertising spend and spend-related metrics for app engagement as well. So you can see here, for example, and I always use this example, but Facebook has low volume of sessions, low investment, but the return on advertising spend is at 250%. That's double what AdWords is, or Google's CPC, which has the most investment, the most sessions, the most engagement, you can argue. So the thought here, the insight is, maybe we should crank up our investment in Facebook a little bit, see if we can maintain a high return, high profit, or high margin, so that we can ultimately drive our bottom line. That's kind of the concept behind this report and using the data import capabilities. And of course, we have our own tool that automates it, Analyzely, shameless plug. If you're interested more on how to allocate or look at advertising spend, I highly encourage you guys checking out our webinar from a few weeks ago. It's up on our website. It's all about these types of capabilities and how to measure your sources of traffic. Speaking of sources of traffic, I'm just going to check if there's any questions. I don't see anything coming in. As with web, Google Analytics automatically integrates with AdWords. So there are capabilities within AdWords to do mobile app advertising specifically, whether it's on the display network, across other mobile applications, or on the mobile search to drive installs. You can capture all of that information here in Google Analytics as well through the integration. So you can see AdWords campaigns, keywords, ad groups, etc., as they drive app-specific metrics, engagement, revenue, etc. The beauty is, though, it's a two-way street. So not only are you pulling data in from AdWords or getting that information automatically passed in, but also you can build segments in Google Analytics specifically around app engagement or screen views or events or different interactions people are taking within your app. You can build those segments, create audiences, and pass them into AdWords to do remarketing within the app ecosystem. So it's a really powerful capability that transcends from the web connection down to the app connection as well, or to the mobile app level. So you can use Google Analytics to almost power your AdWords campaigns or retargeting efforts. Another capability that we always recommend, regardless of what platform you're using, if you have any kind of user ID or login capability, if you're an e-commerce site or some kind of media site, and there's just a way for users to log into your application, we highly recommend tracking user ID, both as the user ID capabilities, which I'll talk about here, that Google automatically provides, but also as a custom dimension so that you can integrate with other channels and systems other databases like your user database, your CRM system, etc. One good example of how this is useful from an mobile app analytics perspective, it's not actually shown here in the screenshot, but if you're tracking customer ID around all of your customers and how many times they're coming to the site, how many times they're looking at screens or purchasing, and you're doing push notifications as well to re-engage your customers in your push notification system, whatever tool you might be using, or if you built it in-house or directly into your app, you'll have a record of how many push notifications and what type of push notifications were sent out to particular customers, because it's at the individual customer level. So since you're tracking Google Analytics, these individual customers tied to customer ID, you can actually bring in push notification metrics or volume and see in GA, you can start to compare how many sessions, how many screen views, how many events, and how many push notifications cause our optimal or top customers to purchase. You can begin to segment this many push notifications drove this much revenue because you can tie it at that user level. It's similar to on web when you can bring in email metrics like email sends, email opens, things that might not be tracked in GA automatically because they live in your email servicing tool. But if you can bring that back into Google Analytics tied to customer ID, since you know who you're sending your emails to, you can see how many times does it take a user to actually open an email, or how many times does it take us to send them an email before they actually come to the site and make a purchase. So you can see that offline, online, or multi-system integration here. When you're tracking user ID the way Google automatically suggests it with the user ID capability itself, some of these reports will become unlocked as far as device overlap and device pathing, etc. So if you do have a website and mobile app where users can log into both or either, you can start to tie the interactions or I guess relationship between what users are doing on your website versus what they're doing on their app, and how does that impact each other. So if you're an e-commerce site, you might have noticed that users on an app might be higher volume, less conversions because they're doing a lot more research. And then they go to the desktop when they're actually ready to buy and commit because they have to type in their credit card and do all this stuff where they can check their phone in between meetings, on their way to work, as they're commuting, etc. That's just one potential insight that you can actually glean from these reports, these cross-device reports, and understand, okay, maybe our mobile app experience needs to be more informational, where our desktop needs to be as simple of a checkout process as possible, because the users have typically already done the research and are ready to buy. Another in beta report is the lifetime value reports. This is only for apps. It's very app specific, but essentially you can see here the lifetime value of users as they're engaging with your mobile application. So this is useful, especially for an e-commerce site and you have purchase capabilities. As users are coming back to your site after installing initially, you can see throughout time, how does their value increase? And this is automatically available as long as you have revenue tracking in your view. This report will be built for you by Google Analytics. It's in beta, so feel free to check it out and play around. So the acquisition dates related to the actual first load or first app, when they first open the app, and then throughout time, how has their revenue increased, lifetime value. Cool report that's also available in web and in apps, but might be particularly valuable or interesting is the benchmarking reports. So by enabling benchmarking, you can share your data anonymously with Google and compare your data, pre-conversion data, so this is volume, acquisitional, or behavioral data, against similar companies or competitors, for that matter, within your industry and at the same volume of traffic. Now, the value here and how it's related to mobile app analytics is to see, if your app goes beyond just one country or one region, you can see how does your app compare to other similar companies with the same volume or same vertical as far as engagement or behavior. As well as if you have multiple platforms, you can see which one competitively or benchmark-wise has more or less traffic and from what different channels or different behavioral metrics there as well. Looks like we have a question come in. Let me see. The lifetime value report includes all channels, app and desktop. It's a great question. Unfortunately, lifetime value reports, which are in beta, are only for app-specific views. So it won't show any desktop traffic because desktop regular traffic cannot actually go into an app-specific view. The app-specific view filters out desktop traffic by default. So lifetime value reports are only for apps specifically. Okay, so let's continue on to another report. So the next couple slides, probably the next 10 slides, are all just other capabilities with mobile app analytics. There isn't really a flow at this point. It's just specific reports that differentiate mobile app analytics versus web for Google Analytics. So the app crashes and exceptions report, here you can see with a little bit extra implementation, so this does require another library and a little bit more development work to set up on your mobile applications. You can actually see what causes a crash or exception or error on your application on multiple levels. So automatically you can see what type of device, what operating system, or what version of your app might be causing a crash or exception. And that might be particularly valuable when you're publishing or taking a new app version live and you want to see if there's any increase in user functionality or decrease, I guess, in actual functionality of your mobile application. So by setting up this crashes and exceptions report, you can even set a new dimension called exception description, so that as soon as an exception or crash happens, you can pass a little bit of information about what that was into Google Analytics and start to diagnose, okay, we took this app version live, we're having a huge increase in crashes specifically from Samsung. So maybe it's Samsung devices we missed in our testing, or there's something, the way that phone works, it doesn't work well with our particular app. So what's some information around what that particular issue could be? So let's diagnose that. That's all a possibility with Google Analytics for apps. So let me backtrack. There's another follow-up question. Even with user ID enabled, can we see the lifetime value reports for desktop? So again, unfortunately, the lifetime value reports are only for app-specific views. The user ID views or user ID tracking, it does create a new view that's separate from the mobile app-specific view. So there's essentially three types of views within Google Analytics. There's a desktop/all view, because a desktop, there's no such thing as a desktop-only view. There's just a standard view, which can just be for desktop or just be for mobile websites, or it can be for everything, desktop, apps, and mobile websites. So it's the standard view. Then there's a second type of view, which is the user ID specific view. That you have to actually enable from the property settings. Once you have user ID tracking itself, you have to create that separately. And that can include desktop and mobile apps traffic, as long as user ID is set. But then the third type of view is a mobile app specific view. And that specific mobile app view is the only one that has lifetime value reports, even if you're tracking user ID, because that last view only allows in app specific hits. So those are the three types of reports that you can have, or sorry, three types of views you can have in Google Analytics. With Google Analytics, similar to web, there's real-time reports where you can see mobile app hits as they come in, as users are navigating your app. The note here, though, the keynote here is that mobile app hits can be batched, meaning they don't necessarily are sent in as soon as they occur. So whether your user is not on the internet, or they have low battery, or they have connectivity issues, or what have you, Google Analytics might collect all the hits and see what users are doing, but then send them all together at once. Instead of each screen view, as the screen view happens, one at a time, it could collect a group of hits and send those all at the same time. Now, from a real-time perspective, you might think, well, the timing is going to be all off. Why is it not going to show 10 hits all at one time and then nothing and then 10 more hits? Well, Google Analytics does collect the timestamp as the interactions are happening. Even if it's collecting and sends it all 10 hits in one batch, each single hit has a specific timestamp that'll get populated appropriately in the real-time reports. So you might notice that a hit that you do on your phone, if you're testing, for example, might not show up for a few minutes. But when it does show up, it doesn't show up at the beginning of the timeline. It shows up, at the time that it would have showed up if it was instantaneous. So the timestamp collection is very important there. But that's a capability with mobile app analytics that makes sense. If your users are offline but can still use your app, send those hits in later when they connect back to the internet, but make sure the timing is still appropriate. One, I guess, last note about the mobile app batching process is that you can modify this. So there's some defaults. I think it's 2 minutes for iOS and 30 minutes for Android using Google Tag Manager. That can all be customizable, how often you want to send the batch or dispatch, I guess, the hits. If you want to make it a little bit quicker, or you want to preserve users, navigation, you don't want to send as many hit requests all at once or simultaneously, you can actually modify that process. Let's see. I think we have about 10 more minutes, so I need to pick up the pace a little bit. We talked about mobile app versions report. This is just a visual for it, so I'll skip through that one. Again, app versioning is something that's possible to collect, and you can have secondary dimensions, new versus returning, and what users are doing, how engaged they are. I'm going to go ahead and just proceed through this since we've talked about it before. Again, the slides and recording will be available to you afterwards. Another suite of reports that are specifically for apps is app speed reports. It's pretty self-explanatory. With a little bit more implementation, you can track user timings, or how long it takes your app to load, or how long it's taking users to actually navigate. And there's a few different ways to display this information. I'm not going to go through them in detail here, but you can see the map overlay. It'll show you different parts of the world or different cities that might have different app speeds. This is, again, sampled at the moment, so you can modify the sample rate depending on what tool you're using. It can be adjusted, but it gives you a snapshot into what kind of timings your users might have. So if it's more than a couple seconds, which in mobile terms is an eternity, you might have something that you need to look into. So what you can do here is you can see the average user timing to actually load your app, where most users fall into, and if there's any issues there. You can create segments so that you can see specifically, I just want to see our average user timing for iOS. So creating a segment there to say, just show me iOS or my Apple users, and what are their user timings. Again, this is a sample, but it gives you a little bit of indication on potentially where you need to optimize. And again, by using the segmentation, you can see different operating systems, different devices specifically, different brands, whether it's new or returning users in case you're sending different network requests, if it's their first time loading the app versus they're a seasoned or returning user. You can do that all here in the app speed report as well after a little bit of extra implementation. As with web, I just wanted to point out that you can track pretty much anything in your app as long as there's an implementation behind it. So user event tracking or interaction tracking, this is just an example screenshot from one of our other clients. They're tracking things like coupon requests, add to cart, checkout. All of these items can be tracked in your web or app properties, and then segments can be set up around it, or these can be leveraged in that new report. Speaking of segmentation, it's possible in Google Analytics. That's probably one of the most advantageous reasons to use Google Analytics over other platforms is you can segment. In this particular example, we're segmenting different countries. You can see the top devices and their breakdown against that as well. I wanted to show an example here of creating a segment for those that might not have ever done this before or are a little rusty. Anywhere you see add segment, you can click on it to open up the segment creation wizard. There's a couple of pre-built segments that Google always has, but then you can create your own. And you can see here in this example, I'm showing data source, which is a very useful dimension to keep in mind, especially if you're tracking mobile app hits and web hits together. The data source actually identifies if it was coming from an app or coming from the web, whether it's a web on desktop or web on a mobile device, like a mobile website. But you can split it, so I just want to see app-specific hits from our Android app where the revenue per user is greater than 100. So I want to collect all users using Android, specifically the Android app, that have purchased more than $100. And the reason that I might want to create this is, well, these are some of my most valuable customers. I know they're on Android, so I can send them specific advertisements on Android ad networks, with retargeting, or I can see what types of devices are bringing in these top customers, I guess, or highest revenue customers. This is all possible with the segmentation capabilities. Well, one thing I wanted to throw in there, and we're kind of winding down on the slides here, is, up until this point, I showed you all about the reporting capabilities and different information and insights that you can get from Google Analytics, but it does come back down to getting the implementation done. So what we always recommend is going through your mobile apps or your web or whatever platform you're trying to track, identify your business questions, your business requirements, your wish list of things you want to see or questions you want to answer, and then build an implementation guide that will answer those questions. So the way we do it is for every screen, every page, or every type of interaction, we put together at least one slide to say, here's how it should be tracked. The Google support documentation is very, very great. It's very thorough, but it's also quite generic. What we do for our clients and for our partners is going through their specific setup, understanding their specific parameters and items that they might need implemented, and building an implementation guide that's tailored for that specifically. We, of course, always use Google Tag Manager because it's extremely powerful. And from an app sense, one of the key advantages that often goes overlooked is when you're using Google Tag Manager on your apps, for simple changes like deploying a new tracking pixel or adding in new variables and modifying your tracking tags or what have you, you can push these changes to your application without resubmitting your app to the app stores. That's pretty key because before tag management systems, users would have to re-download the new application every time any modification was made. Google Tag Manager and other tag management systems actually replace a lot of that from a tracking perspective specifically, so you can deploy things to your application without resubmitting to the App Store. It's a really powerful capability here, particularly when you're trying to track more and more on your mobile app. With Google Tag Manager, it also works with iOS. There's a special library for IDFA tracking, which I talked about thoroughly before, so that's just something to keep in mind as you're deploying this, or for your development team to keep in mind as well. One of the last things I want to talk about is a little bit technical, but it's how the dataLayer and Google Tag Manager work on apps, particularly on iOS. The dataLayer, or information that you collect within your app that you want to pass to GA, is actually persistent from screen to screen. Whereas in web, anything you put into the dataLayer on one page, information about the user or the session or the page itself and the products that you have, it only lives on that single page until a new page is loaded, a new dataLayer is created with new information. On apps, if you set up the dataLayer on one screen and you don't clear it, on the second screen as you navigate through, the information that you inserted in that dataLayer, the specific attributes, they go with the user as they navigate through. It's persistent. The challenge here is that if you have an e-commerce site, for example, or e-commerce application, at the thank you page when someone makes a purchase, transactional data will get passed into the dataLayer and then passed into Google Analytics. But because it's persistent, if they continue on back to the home page or another detail page, that transactional data might get sent again. So you might have a huge inflation of data that was persistent from previous screens. So what we recommend is just clearing the dataLayer after each specific call or each specific push, because it gives you a fresh slate. And that's exactly how the web works. After each page view, the dataLayer is cleaned, it's wiped, and then on the next page, there's a new set of information that you want to pass. So we like to follow that model. Last slide I want to show, and then we'll wrap it up, or at least have some time for questions, is just testing. We have a webinar, I believe, in about a week's time, where we're going to talk a lot more thoroughly about how to validate your Google Analytics data, where we're going to go into more detail around testing mobile applications, as well as web, to make sure that you have quality data. The way we do it for mobile apps, the way we find the easiest is using a proxy service, such as Charles Proxy. High level, what this means is you would load a program on your computer that serves as kind of an in-between gateway between your phone or emulator and Google Analytics. So as you navigate through your phone or emulator, click on different things, this tool, such as Charles Proxy, it will capture the network request being sent from your emulator or phone, or iPad for that matter, and it can display the information that's being sent from the app out to the Google servers, for example. So this collect here hit request is from Google Analytics. You can see specific parameters like custom dimensions, the page name, the tracking ID, and this is how you can validate the hits are working as intended as you go screen to screen or on clicking different items, so that you can confirm your developers have implemented what you need, the way you need it. Let's see. We have a question come in, but I'm just going to skip to the last slide for those that need to drop off, since we're about at the top of the hour. Just thank you for joining. If you do need to drop off, feel free to sign up for our future events or contact me, particularly if you're still in Dubai. I know this is designed for the US market, so feel free to email me or anyone at our team if you have more questions or want more information. Otherwise, I'm going to stick around for a few more minutes to answer some questions. And the first question that came in recently, how mandatory is implementation of the GA SDK? Using GTM is not enough. So if I understand the question correctly, Google Analytics can be implemented using the standard GA SDK directly on your apps, or using the Google Tag Manager SDK. Now, the value with using Google Tag Manager, besides what I mentioned before, is that as soon as you implement Google Tag Manager, it's essentially almost all the components are already there that you need. So you just need to set up the tags within GTM itself. Whereas if you're only doing the GA SDK, you might have different components, different libraries that you also need to implement to get it really fully worked out. Overall, Google Tag Manager, or just tag management systems in general, is the way to go with any kind of platform. So we highly recommend doing it that approach. It's not mandatory, but we would just highly, highly encourage using a tag management system. Question came in, is a GTM installation the same for mobile and web? Actually, no. So on web, the installation is pasting the JavaScript code on the website and then also configuring the data layer. While the concept is the same for mobile apps, you have the GTM SDK, which is equivalent to the JavaScript code itself on web, but the GTM SDK, and then you have a concept of a data layer as well. So the concept is the same. You have data layer with a bunch of information, then you have Google Analytics through Google Tag Manager, whether it's the JavaScript on web or the SDK on app, but they are different. It's not the same JavaScript, it's a whole different code base, and it's different implementation for iOS than it is for Android as well. So, and to continue on that, you will need to set up a container for Android and a container for iOS, because even the GTM containers themselves are slightly different and they have different binaries. Even though the interface can be set up identically in Google Tag Manager, the code base itself, the SDKs, are inherently different. So that would be the only extra step there, is just to ensure you have an Android container or an iOS container with a specific SDK for each that would need to get implemented depending on what type of device you have or what type of app you're trying to track for. So we have another question come in. How can we merge users' information, web and app, to view in GA? So that's a great question. I mean, really with this, what we would recommend is using the same Google Analytics property ID. So whether it's GTM JavaScript on a website or GTM SDK on an app or just the GA SDK or GA code, you will always need a Google Analytics property ID. If you use the same Google Analytics property ID across all of your platforms, you'll be able to collect all the data together. And then simply in Google Analytics, when you create views, you can create segmented or filtered views to see different platforms, or you can have an unfiltered raw data view that shows all of your data together, so total users across web and app. So the key there is just having the same property ID or property number across all of your platforms tracking GA. All right, so I'm going to stick around just about 2 or 3 more minutes for any other questions. But for those that joined, thank you so much. We hope to see you in a future webinar. Feel free to sign up for those, and we'll have the recording, the slides up as well. But thanks so much for joining, and we hope to see you at a future event. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, but I'll stick around for about 2 more minutes for any additional questions. So thanks so much, guys.